In December 2009, the world was watching at the city of Copenhagen as it was hosting the 15th United Nations Climate Change Conference. Both the peoples of the developing and the developed countries were equally eager to hear the decisions coming out of the conference, because it was decisive either to safeguard or destroy the earth. Thinking of the upcoming tough decisions and negotiations on the climate conference, every country was able to send its delegates to Denmark with a dense duty. Africa, on its part, for the first time in history, was preparing to negotiate as one team, with one voice, on this historic climate summit. Prior to leaving for Copenhagen, the African team of negotiators, led by the late Ethiopian Prime Minister Meles Zenawi, had received a warm farewell at the National Palace. As a voice of the continent, Meles had to listen to the heartfelt message of 1 billion Africans.
አባቶች በጸሎትና በምህላ ከሕፃን እስከ አዋቂ ከሊቅ እስከ ደቂቅ አፍሪካዊ በየትኛውም መልኩ ከልኡካን ቡድኑ ጎን እንዲሆንና የሚሄዱበት የሚሳካ የሚናገሩት የሚደመጥ የሚጠይቁት የሚመለስ ተልእኳቸው የሰመረ እንዲሆን በመልካም ምኞት ለማጀብ ነው።
እኛ ሚሊዮን ቢሊዮን ሆነን ከአፍሪካ ምድር እንጮሃለን። አብረን ተባብረን ድምጻችንን እናሰማ።
I want to assure everyone here that I will work tirelessly and with total dedication to the fulfillment of the interests of our continent as a whole in the upcoming negotiations. Allow me to conclude by saying, wish me luck, because I know I'm going to need buckets of it in the coming week. Thank you very much.
On the eve of the conference, the whole world was watching Copenhagen, and Africa was watching Meles Zenawi. In this crucial moment, Meles was not just an individual or a leader of a country, but the voice of 1 billion Africans. Guided by the popular principle, unity is strength, Meles proposed the idea of speaking with one voice in a series of meetings held before the conference.
He suggested that, look, in the summit of January, the continent, the entire world is focusing on climate change. Climate change is here. We Africans, we are many, we have the question of numbers, which we can use to negotiate better. He suggested the heads of state that we should speak with one voice. It was his idea.
Meles strongly believed that Africa can be heard on any world stage if it voices itself as one unit. He knew that the continent had remained voiceless and had suffered enormously in similar events for failing to stand together. And this failure was not to be repeated in the Copenhagen Climate Change Conference. Meles knows very well the tragic damage that climate change has caused in Africa. The recurrent droughts, seasonal flooding, hunger and famine which claim thousands of lives across the continent are the results of climate change. Studies indicate Due to climate change, Africa will lose 2/3 of its cultivable land. Agricultural productivity will decline by half. 250 million people on the continent will face a shortage of drinking water. Its major towns will be affected by flooding. Infectious diseases like malaria will spread spontaneously. Desertification, drought, and hunger will increase sharply by 2020. Therefore, for Meles, losing at the Copenhagen Climate Conference was equivalent or worse than these disasters. And this is the dominant rationale behind African leaders unanimously appointing Meles to represent the continent at the climate conference.
The decision was taken in July to confirm the committee of the heads of state, and then December we were in Copenhagen negotiating as one team.
The late Prime Minister is aware of the battle that awaits him in Copenhagen. His mind was stretched between do-or-die alternatives. Hours after the farewell ceremony at the Ethiopian National Palace in Addis Ababa, the 15th UN Conference on Climate Change officially launches in Copenhagen. The time has come for Meles to speak on behalf of 1 billion Africans, and he took the stage with a determination to put his ideas into action.
It gives me great pleasure to welcome to the conference His Excellency Mr. Meles Zenawi. You have the floor.
Ethiopia is deeply honored to have been chosen to be the spokesman of Africa on climate change and to lead the common negotiating team. I am immensely proud to be able to speak today not on behalf of my country, Ethiopia, but on behalf of Mother Africa as a whole.
In his remarkable speech in this conference, Prime Minister Meles Zenawi made the challenge of the continent an international agenda. He also has moved the negotiation power of Africa to an unprecedented level.
ከሁሉም አህጉራት በጣም የምትጎዳው በአየር ንብረት ለውጥ አፍሪካ ናት። ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትር መለስ ናቸው የአፍሪካን ሚና በአየር ንብረት ለውጥ ድርድር በጣም እንዲጎላ ያደረጉት።
Every one of us knows that Africa has contributed virtually nothing to global warming, but has been hit first and hardest. The fragility of our ecosystem has meant that for Africans, the damage of climate change is not something that could happen in the future. It's already here with us, sowing misery and death across the land. Africa is indeed paying with the misery and death of its people for the wealth and well-being that was created in the developed countries through carbon-intensive development. That, of course, is fundamentally unjust.
Among the negotiation agendas put on the table in the Copenhagen Climate Conference, proposing the size of the Fund for Climate Change Adaptation in developing countries was the most contentious. The developed and developing countries couldn't easily agree on this point.
የኮፐንሃገኑ ስብሰባ ላይ ትልቅ ፍጥጫ ነበር። አንደኛ የአሜሪካ መንግስት የኦባማ ፕሬዝዳንት አቋም ይዘው እንዳይሄዱ ኮንግረሱ ከልክሏቸዋል። ቻይና እንዳትወገዝ ተፈለግ ነበር። ፈረንሳይ ሌላ አቋም ነበራት።
At this moment of dispute, the African negotiator, Meles Zenawi, representing not only Africa, but a total of 77 developing countries, came up with a solution.
On startup funding, short-term funding for the next 2 to 3 years, I support the establishment of a startup fund of $10 billion per annum for the years of 2010 to 2012. On long-term financing, I propose funding for adaptation and mitigation should start by 2013 to reach up to $50 billion per annum by 2015 and $100 billion per annum by 2020.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
You have been working so hard. I'm very impressed.
In this way, Prime Minister Meles Zenawi proposed the popular figure of $100 billion, which world leaders had been discussing since 2009 as compensation to developing countries for the damage caused by climate change. By this proposal, he helped to narrow the differences between the negotiating parties and facilitated an acceptable agreement.
America will be a part of a fast start funding that will ramp up to $10 billion by 2012. We will engage in a global effort to mobilize $100 billion in financing by 2020.
ፈረንጆቹ አነጋገር ከ11ኛው ሰዓት አልፎ ተስፋ የሚያስቆርጥ ደረጃ ላይ የደረሰ ድርድር ነው የነበረው። በስተመጨረሻው ግን እንደምንም በተሳካ መልኩ ለመቋጨት ተችሏል። በዚህም አፍሪካ እና ኢትዮጵያ ተጠቃሚ እንደሚሆኑ ጥርጥር የለኝም።
በብቃታቸው የተነሳ ወደ ኮፐንሃገን ከመምጣታቸው በፊት ወሳኝ የሚሏቸውን መንግስታት ቀደም ብለው አነጋግረው በመቆየት በኮፐንሃገን ይገኛል ተብሎ ተገምቶ ከነበረ እናቀርባለን የሚለው የለሙ ሀገሮች ቃል ከፍ ብሎ ነው የተገኘው።
አፍሪካን ይወክላል የተባለው ቡድን አዲስ አበባ ተሰብስቦ በነበረበት ወቅት ከተቻለ 60-70 ቢሊዮን ድረስ ለአፍሪካ መጠየቅ አለበት። ካልተቻለ የመጨረሻው ምን ጠይቀው ከ18 ቢሊዮን እስከ 23 ቢሊዮን አካባቢ ነው ምን ጠይቀው የሚል ሐሳብ ነው አቋም ነበር የተወሰደው ውስጥ አቋም። በዚህ ላይ በመመስረት እኔ ያቀረብኩት ሐሳብ ለአፍሪካ ከ30 እስከ 40 ቢሊዮን ዶላር ያስገኛል ተብሎ የሚገመት ነው።
Talking to one point on the continent, talking to one point globally was a big achievement, and this was Meles. If he was not there, we wouldn't have managed it.
And I want also to take this opportunity to pay tribute to you, Mr. Prime Minister, because you have been in several cases our spokesman, our spokesperson. In the G8, the G20, today in the climate change, and we do appreciate the sacrifice you're making in order to represent the whole continent, to have to speak with one voice in difficult issues such as climate change. And I admire the way you treat these questions.
ኮፐንሃገን ላይ የተባለው 100 ቢሊዮን እንዴት ይገኛል? 100 ቢሊዮን መጠኑ ይቀመጥ እንጂ በምን መንገድ ከየት ይመነጫል የሚለው ነገር አልታወቀም ነበርና የዩናይትድ ኔሽን ጀነራል ሴክሬታሪ ባንኪሙን የኢትዮጵያ ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትር ክቡር መለስ ዜናዊንና የኖርዌይን ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትር ሁለቱን አጥንተው እንዲያቀርቡ ካንኩን ላይ ተብሎ ነበር።
Primer ministro de Etiopía.
Even in the current difficult global environment, it's possible it's feasible, it's doable for us to mobilize $100 billion of public and private funds for climate change financing.
The 17th Climate Change Conference was held in Durban, South Africa in November 2011. In this conference, too, Africa was represented by the late Prime Minister Meles Zenawi. In COP17, the key point of negotiation was about extending the Kyoto Protocol for another 5 years. The Kyoto Protocol is the only regime available to combat climate change, and it was due to end in 2012. Ending this protocol would be devastating for Africa. Therefore, Meles had to fight bitterly for its extension.
ይሄንን ፕሮቶኮል ብዙ ሀገሮች ሲቀላቀሉት ዩናይትድ ስቴትስ ወይም አሜሪካ አልተቀበለችም፣ ከመጀመሪያም አልፈረመችም። የኮይቶ ፕሮቶኮል የሚጠብቀው በብዛት የሚፈለገው በአፍሪካ ህዝቦች ሆኖ ያለ በአፍሪካን ሶይል ወይም በአፍሪካ መሬት ላይ ይቀበራል የሚል አቋም ይዘው ነበር እየገፉ ያሉት። ስለዚህ ይሄንን እንዳይሆን ከሞተም ሌላ አህጉር ውስጥ ይሞት እንጂ አፍሪካ ውስጥ መሆን አይገባውም በሚል ምክንያቱም ከማንም በላይ የሚጠብቀው አፍሪካ ነው። ስለዚህ የነሱ ከለላና ጠባቂ የሆነውን ሰነድ በነሱ አፈር ላይ ሲቀበር ማየት ሲሞት ማየት የህሊና ይሞራል እንትና አይሰጥም።
But for Meles, the issue of saving the Kyoto Protocol was not only a matter of achieving peace of mind. Rather, it had a danger that could have diluted his effort of protecting African interests, which he had been working for throughout his tenure in office. Therefore, it was a life or death issue. Prior to the conference, he gathered his team members and provided orientation on how to win the forthcoming battle.
This is a huge army. It's a team of 53 players. I don't know of any game which has 53 players in it. Let's make use of our size. We can outflank, outplay any team.
One Africa, one message. Could you repeat, please? One Africa, one message.
In South Africa, COP17, there, the most important, what I would call like an agreement on climate change, which we have been negotiating, was going to collapse. It was in COP17 in Durban, where we were able to save it, and the late PM contributed heavily to that one.
Apart from climate change negotiations, Meles had been proudly representing Africa in other prominent world stages such as the G8 and G20 summits. In times of crisis and international concerns, world leaders needed Meles's insightful ideas for a solution.
አንደኛ ኢትዮጵያ በአፍሪካ ክፍለ ዓለም ውስጥ ታማኝ አባልነቷን የሚያረጋግጥ ነው። ሁለተኛው ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትራችን የአፍሪካን ፍላጎቶች ሙሉ በሙሉ በመወከል በዚህ መድረክ ላይ እና በሌሎች መድረኮች ላይ በተወከሉበት መድረኮች ላይ የአፍሪካን ፍላጎት እንዲረጋገጥ አበርትተው እንደሚሰሩና ውጤታማ የሆነ ተግባሮችን እንደሚያካሂዱ አፍሪካም ከፍተኛ እምነት በኢትዮጵያ ላይ እንዳሳደረ የሚያሳይ ጉዳይ ነው።
His ability to manage the relationship with the big powers, create space for African ideas. When he's in the platform representing Africa, everybody listens and respects it because what he says is coherent, intelligent, and insightful.
Hey Yahweh, hey Yahweh, kumama. Hey Yahweh, hey Yahweh, kumama.
Prime Minister Meles Zenawi's contribution to Africa was not confined to being his voice in critical times. Also, he had worked hard to enhance the overall development and prosperity of the continent. He spoke out loud for Mother Africa, anywhere, anytime, and turned his words into action. During the transformation of the OAU into AU, Prime Minister Meles Zenawi's role was simply instrumental.
After the extraordinary summit in Silte 1999, which came up with the Silte Declaration enshrining, among other things, the establishment of the African Union. Now, the participation and the contribution of Meles in that transformation was very great, and particularly in so far as drafting of the Constitutive Act.
After the transformation, the question on the table was how and when the continental organ should move to political integration. However, the answers were not easy and had created differences among African leaders. The team led by Prime Minister Meles Zenawi argues in favor of gradual and natural integration, while the group led by the late Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi was saying the integration of Africa must come today or tomorrow.
የአፍሪካ ዩኒየን ሲባል መላውን አፍሪካ የሚያስተዳድር አንድ መንግስት፣ መላውን አፍሪካ የሚያስተሳስር አንድ ኢኮኖሚ፣ በሌላ አነጋገር ዩናይትድ ስቴትስ ኦፍ አፍሪካ የሚል አስተያየት ያላቸው ሰዎችም አሉ። በኔ ግምት ጊዜው አይደለም። አንድ መንግስት፣ አንድ ኢኮኖሚ፣ አንድ ሀገር መሆን የሚቻል አይደለም።
Through the wisdom of Meles, along with the others, the Benjamin Mkapa of Tanzania by then, and the like-minded, they said that no, we shouldn't rush. Let us go step by step to reflect the realities on the ground.
The late Prime Minister Meles Zenawi firmly argued that the political integration of Africa should come through time. And economic integration has to come first through interconnecting neighboring countries with infrastructure and by strengthening regional economic communities. To realize his ideas of integrating Africa naturally, Meles started the homework through connecting his country with Kenya, Sudan, South Sudan, and Djibouti with road and power infrastructure.
አሁን የተሰራው መንገድ በሁለቱ ወንድማማችና ጎረቤት ህዝቦች መካከል ከዚህ በፊትም የቆየውን ወዳጅነት ይበልጥ ያጠናክራል። We are more than ever convinced that we in the region swim or sink together. We are determined to make sure that we swim together rather than sink together. That requires that we integrate our economies and make the best of each other's potential. This in turn requires that we intensify infrastructural links as a first step in regional integration.
The belief that Africa and its integration process must go on, that the people of Africa need to be united, that Africans, wherever they are, in Africa and in the diaspora, have a common history and also a common destiny, that our future is bound together, and that it's only a united and strong Africa that will be able to move us forward, to develop Africa further.
One of the reasons why Meles was so insistent on regional integration was that he said that economic integration across the continent was a matter not only of development but therefore of the survival of Africa as a continent with its own political destiny in its own hands.
Africa is a continent of many minds, but Prime Minister Meles was able to get Africa to be one. So in diversity, he was able to have that union of mind. I think that was his very, very big contribution.
He believes in the building of strong institutions that will help further the cause of governance on the continent. And that has become for us a major issue. We think that Africa, 50 years after the formation of the African Union, we require to begin to build strong institutions.
Meles was very important in the leadership of NEPAD, the New Partnership for Africa's Development, in making sure that that was one of the core African Union activities.
Prime Minister Meles Zenawi was a lifetime student, a voracious reader, influential speaker, and international analyst. Through his research, Meles had identified the main reason why the African economy had been declining for years. According to Meles, the major reason was related to the political economy that Africa pursues.
Basically what the late Prime Minister Meles was arguing was that as Africa stands today, it does not have comparative advantage in any agricultural or manufacturing product. And therefore, if the policy prescriptions of the Washington Consensus, of the neoliberals are followed, the state will be reduced in size and reduced in capacity to direct the economy. And what liberalization will then mean is that the leaders in the business sector and in politics of every country will simply turn to rent-seeking, because that is where the profit will lie. So in order for Africa to develop, it needs to follow a different model, a model which is directed by a political leadership.
Meles always argued against the neoliberal paradigm, which in his opinion had failed the continent for the last 3 decades. He knew that neoliberalism was the cause of many tragic events in several African countries. Those who have followed the neoliberal ideology, the International Monetary Fund and World Bank's Structural Adjustment Program, have paid a long-lasting economic price.
This is how it has killed Africa. After 25 years, we had no roads. Our small industries died. We had no energy. We invested, we even withdrew from research support for higher education. So our research capability collapsed, our infrastructure collapsed, we have no energy to invest, we de-industrialized even before we industrialized, meaning our petty industries died alongside it. We became exceedingly dependent on the imports of external commodity financed by debt and aid. Therefore, we became also exceedingly dependent on the whims of the international donors. In fact, we lost our independence of thought and as people, having ideas about what we want to do with our society. We mortgaged our society to international aid.
Meles Zenawi, who was aware of this consequence, did not want to see it happening in his country. Therefore, he was the first African leader who dared to reject the neoliberal policy prescriptions. Indeed, he managed to overcome the series of pressures from the World Bank and International Monetary Fund starting from his first day in power.
Prime Minister Meles was one of the first, certainly the first as far as I know, head of government. Very early on he criticized many of the things which now are widely accepted. So, you know, the Washington Consensus type policies in Africa, we say accounted for the lost quarter century of Africa. we had the reform programs and so on had pretty, and this is now very widely accepted that there were a lot of mistakes made in the kind of conditionality that were imposed on Africa in the 1980s in particular.
It's notable that in the 1990s, when just after the transition, just after EPRDF came to power, the World Bank and the IMF assumed that they could just dictate to Ethiopia, this poor, weak country just emerging from war, deeply indebted, etc. They could just tell it what to do. And they were actually very surprised when Meles said to them, we're not going to take your money, we're not going to take your loans because the conditions don't suit us. We're going to reject them until you reform your conditions.
One of the biggest one was, for example, the Prime Minister strongly resisted pressures from various organizations to liberalize the financial sector, to open the capital account. Okay? And the reasons he gave in his argument have been borne out to be true. So first came the East Asian financial crisis. He made those arguments before the East Asian financial crisis. Even today's financial crisis in the West validates many of the arguments the Prime Minister made at the time, and he saved Ethiopia from it.
Africans have, for the first time in 3 decades, real alternatives to the orthodoxy. They now have a choice that they have not had for a long time. The fact that Africans now have a choice is, in and of itself, fundamentally liberating. Above and beyond that, Africans now have a real chance to chart a new course of development, one that incorporates best practice elsewhere and is capable of generating fast growth and transformation.
Prime Minister Meles openly stated that Africa needs a paradigm shift away from neoliberalism to a homegrown and more progressive ideology, the democratic developmental state. Meles, who was the first initiator of this idea, pushed relentlessly for African states to pursue this model of development.
To Meles, ዲሞክራሲያዊ ልማታዊ መንግስት በአፍሪካ ውስጥ መፍጠር ይቻላል. The African state has to be reconstructed. መገንባት አለብን. መንግስት የሰራተኛ ብዛትና አቅም ሳይሆን አቅም ያለው መንግስት ከሌለ፣ ብቃት ያለው መንግስት ከሌለ፣ ችሎታ ያለው መንግስት ከሌለ ልማትም አይጀምርም፣ ሰላምም አይኖርም. State is the center of all ነው ማለት ነው.
I think that developmental paradigm within Meles has contributed greatly in transforming the Ethiopian socio-economic development.
You see changes in Ethiopia. Really, Ethiopia is moving fast everywhere. The city of Addis Ababa has been drastically transformed.
In Ethiopia, his leadership of this country brought millions of people out of poverty, improved the quality and standard of living of the country, even at a time when the rest of the world was suffering from global economic recession. Ethiopia's economy continued to grow.
Ensuring peace and stability in Africa was another extraordinary contribution of Meles Zenawi. He deployed significant numbers of peacekeeping forces in Congo, Liberia, Somalia, and Abyei at different times, because he believed African problems should be solved by Africans themselves.
Prime Minister Meles saw Africa-wide peace and security as the absolute bedrock of development. Without that, the continent, he said, would always be in a position of weakness, vulnerability and poverty.
He was interested in the rest of Africa, in peace and security in most parts of Africa. He managed, despite the difficulties he had at home and the issues he had to deal with at home, to find the resources to send Ethiopian peacekeeping troops to many conflict areas in Africa, to Liberia, to Burundi, to Somalia.
He was very important in strengthening the Peace and Security Council. He played an important role in helping to create key African responses to security crises. For example, the African Union High-Level Panel on Sudan, headed by President Thabo Mbeki. Prime Minister Meles was very instrumental in making sure that happened and that it functioned.
Once your neighbor's house is burning, it's an African to fold your hands and they just stand by and look at it. Because you don't know, a spark from your neighbors can also affect you. I think it is within that African wisdom, Ethiopia under Meles, that he was committed to assist the neighboring countries to restore peace.
Understanding his national and continental role, many people called him the voice of Africa, the activist prime minister, and a champion of Africa's progress. Even though he is no longer with us, his legacy will remain living in the heart of Ethiopians and Africans forever.
He looked inwards. He lived for the people. He worked for the people. He believed in the people, and he participated in the process. And as such, we think that African leaders need to emulate some of these very special qualities, especially in ensuring that at the end of their tenure, they leave lasting legacies for the people.
If you go into leadership, do so because you want to provide a service. Judge yourself not by how wealthy you, your family and cronies have become, but how improved the lives of the poorest people on the ground have become.
So those qualities which he had, I think if they were emulated by other African leaders, our continent would shine.
And we believe that the new leadership would have the courage and the strength to continue from where he left and continue to build for a stronger nation, and also continue to provide for the rest of Africa some sort of leadership. Ethiopia remains the political capital of Africa.
Let me take this opportunity to assure you that my government is committed to do all it can to strengthen African interests. This is an enduring legacy bequeathed to us by our late Prime Minister, who more than any other individual raised Africa's banner on high in international fora.
Zambe bolingo, zambe nanguya, tobelela yawe.